really excited to masterclass with Meera Nair ma'am.
She has the most incredible aesthetic and I just generally like her storytelling, so I'm really looking forward to it.
My Insta handle is Pugly and that's my nickname. ये तो छक्का है, इसको तो समझ नहीं आता. I am a disco dancer.
Hello everyone, I'm Devika Girish. Our guest today is Meera Nair. She is an Academy Award nominated filmmaker known for films that cross borders. You may have heard of Salaam Bombay, which won the Camera d'Or at Cannes in 1988. She also made Hysterical Blindness, which won multiple Golden Globes and Emmys. She made the international hit Monsoon Wedding, which, hell yeah, which made her the first woman ever to win the Venice Film Festival's prestigious Golden Lion. Her next film is Amri, an experimental portrait of Amrita Shergill. In 2012, she was awarded the Padma Bhushan, India's third highest civilian honor. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage, Meera Nair.
Thank you so much, city of Salaam Bombay, and to be surrounded mostly by film lovers and passion for this great form that we are so privileged to be a part of, all of us. So thank you, and I really look forward to this conversation, mostly to speak absolutely the truth of what it really is like, and also after we talk, a really welcome conversation with all of you. So thank you.
So, Meera, I want to jump right into it and really open things with the question, why cinema?
I grew up in Bhubaneswar, Orissa. Many Indians at that point didn't even know where that was. A fairly remote but extraordinarily refined place of, I think, 2,000 temples in Bhubaneswar alone. And but I did dream and I did have a vivid imagination, which was largely stoked by books and also by the craft and dance. I was very closely in front of really ancient arts, you know, and I knew that I was ignited by that. Long journey led me to finally get completely hooked by jatra, by traditional mythological theatre that would come through Bhubaneswar, and I would go with my driver and sit in these fields and watch Prahalad Nataka. I would watch great Sanskrit mythologicals, and they were like two guys, you know, on hashish on stairs going to nowhere, and they would take us into real realms of good and evil without much at all, except this extraordinary, you know, oral tradition. Anyway, I thought and then became an actor myself. I was also very influenced by Shakespeareana, by the traveling theatre of first Geoffrey Kendall, who would come to our schools and perform, but also then Barry John, who would come with wonderful actors whom I now work with, you know, on all of that. So I thought, I thought I was an actor. And I really did devote myself to about 4 or 5 years of being an actor while I was at Delhi University and even before. You know, I worked with the Red Curtain in Kolkata. I worked with Theatre Action Group in Delhi. And I loved that. I always tease Lilette Dubé, who was part of that she was always the sex symbol and I was always the boyfriend's mother. But, you know, what I saw about being an actor, at least in that time, was I didn't have any control of anyone. I mean, they were in control of what I would play or the vision of the piece or any of it. And largely, you know, growing up cheek by jowl in India, as we mostly do, cheek by jowl with those who have and those who have nothing, I was always incensed by the inequity of our society. So I wanted to do something about that, and I always did, because my stories and my excitement really would. My mother has this story that I would go out running when I was 11 years old, and दूध वाला के साथ वापस आ जाती है क्योंकि उसकी कहानी इतनी बढ़िया है तो वो बैठा देती है दूध वाले को, और then we have to listen to his कहानी. So I was like that, kind of my nickname, which still which is now my Insta handle, is Pugly, and that's my nickname. And that was what I am and still am, and I hope to always be. And I worked very solidly as an actor at Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in New York City. But again, this idea of not having control was a problem. And then I had to go back to university and pay my dues. And fortunately and very luckily, and really not with much of a plan, stumbled into an extraordinary course in cinema verite filmmaking, the cinema of truth, which was taught by Ricky Leacock, who pretty much founded the handheld camera and the mobile camera, and his colleague D.A. Pennybaker. If I have mentors in our tradition of film, it would be Ricky and Penny, who sort of were the gurus of, at least they kept me on a path of truth, And anyway, so I began really making documentary filmmaking.
Right.
And that's something that no one really understood back home, But it was quite interesting to discover it there, and therefore to do my thing. But ended up from 79 to about 85 or 6, I made 7 films or something like that, 7 documentaries lots in Bombay, lots all over Ahmedabad. Different subjects led me here, and I would live in the chawls and live in the tenements and live where I had to. And my parents, rapidly, one by one, from being a stripper to being this to being that, would say, "Oh, Meera to hai hi nahi aajkal, pata nahi kahan gayi hai." Basically would gracefully disown me for those times that I would not be available because I was living in Antoffi with,
You were still running off with the milkman.
I was,
basically.
well, but it was not, it was it was more dangerous than the
Less
milkman.
wholesome, yeah. What kind of Indian films did you watch growing up, or which were the ones that left some kind of an impression on you? Because there is a very interesting synthesis in all your films, cultural synthesis. So what were the Indian kind of influences?
Well, so the first film I remember was Haryali Aur Rasta. And I remember this kind of, I love music, and I love the sort of escapist, unabashed escapism of that. But so that was the first film. But but in the theater when it was finally made, when I was about 8 years old, there was only one English film that would play every Sunday morning, and that was Dr. Zhivago. And we would often go there, and I don't know, you were too young to know, when in the old days there was electricity, there was bijli, and then there was something called power. And power would make it run, would make the projectors run, but bijli would cut off the ACs. There were no ACs, the fans and whatever. So we would go and see Dr. Zhivago, and it was like Omar Sharif and Icicle and, ice, sab jagah baraf and all, and we were bloody sweating, And the manager would say, हाँ जी वो Dr. Zhivago, Russia में है, अभी कुछ हाँ बहुत बर्फ पड़ रहा है, हाँ गर्मी तो है, but we just believe in the baraf kind of scene, and we would see the same film, often. So it was not really about seeing a lot of cinema at all. When we would go to Calcutta for childhood summers, it was Hatari and John Wayne a little bit, but definitely not looking at cinema in any way that was serious at all. It was much more Russian literature. It was much more Odissi dance. Guru Kelucharan Mahapatra lived in Cuttack right by me, and I would go and sit at his feet and just see who came through. But it was not the movies. It was only when I went to Cambridge, I had this scholarship at Harvard, that's when I saw seriously the first Satyajit Ray films. I saw the Apu trilogy over and over again. I would go to the Museum of Modern Art and see, I saw Ritik Ghatak over and over again. I saw our own great films really on the other side of the ocean in those days. And then that started a whole other dialogue with actually connecting with Manikda, with Satyajit Ray, and asking him if I could be his assistant. And I have several, actually, I'm very happy to have had several several reams of correspondence with him and friendship with him, because I have this theory that if I admire people, I should not meet them until I have something to offer them. And that's for all of you who want selfies without telling me your name. And so it was with my first film, So Far From India, that I climbed the steps of Bishop Lefroy Road with a projector in my hand and a 16 reel, and I actually put it up and put down his blinds and asked Mr. and Mrs. Rai to see my first film.
Wow.
Yeah, really tough life. And he goes there and he really swaggers about, and all his sisters and Hansa and everyone wants is that please take her back to America. And he just doesn't, and there's this child who looks exactly like him and who does not know who he is, of course. And anyway, so he's estranged from her just because of his notions of himself. So my camera becomes the mediary between the husband and the wife. And it's an interesting film because you don't know what's going to happen. Anyway, in this film, he returns to America without taking Hansa. And Mr. and Mrs. Ray, Satyajit Ray is looking at this film, 52 minutes of it, and it ends, and he says to me, Meera, if you had cast a more attractive woman, he would have taken her back.
Could have cast Sharmila Tagore.
But I said there was no casting involved, here. You inherit what you get in this form. But he was completely unfamiliar with the notion of cinema verite. Wow. Because he had made, of course, he was making fiction film, and no one quite made documentaries like this,
I do want to get to another one of your early documentaries, India Cabaret,
right,
which you made in 1985. How did you find these people, the people who are on screen in India Cabaret, and get them to trust you?
The idea that led to making India Cabaret was to explore the line, which seemed to be such a clear line, a dividing line, I call it, between those women who are considered good or proper and those who are considered outside goodness. And obviously it's to do with sexuality, it's to do with economics. But I didn't want to work with necessarily prostitutes, because prostitution is very simple to dismiss in the sense that, I wanted to be much more nuanced in the stripper, in the world of dancers, because those days they were proliferating. There were many bars and all. This is before the bars, the Mujra bars that came about. But so it was really difficult actually to find a situation. It was also really seedy. That's why my parents have a lot to, a lot of flexibility and horror as what to have made them accept. Finally, after a lot of search, I went to Meghraj in Ghatkopar. And what was interesting about this place was actually Rekha and Rosie, these two dancers who had no apparent or overt shame about being seen, and who actually had a very, Rosie was like interested in being sexy, and she really had a thing about it, and Rekha was, muphat like this, and really told it like it is. She just told it like it is. And then I had to convince the owner of Meghraj. There's a scene about that. Yeah. And they let me in, basically. Right. But what I did in this case was I lived with Rekha and Rosie in their home in Antop Hill. They used to call it Antoffi. It was months after that I understood that Antoffi was Antop Hill. But Antoffi and me are like that. And it was pretty bleak to be considered a stripper because I lived there, and to be also just confronted by the desperate situation and the ugliness of that place and the pigs that were careening and the street, everything that happened there. In any case, but that's where you really discovered what it's like to be a part of these deep double standards and deeply judgmental standards of our essentially patriarchal society. So first I did 4 months without any cameras, and just getting them to understand me, because why should they reveal? Why should they trust? I mean, they'll only do that if they know and respect, if there's something mutual between us. And I did that, And then I had two guys, Mitch Epstein, who was great photographer and who was the cinematographer, and Alex Griswold was classmate of mine who did sync sound, because it was not much. And the other interesting thing was, I knew this wonderful man who used to sell sari blouses, matching blouses. He has a little shop he had, and his name now, he loved light, and I gave him a couple of lighting things, to hold, like lights, basically.
Yeah.
And he became part of our team as our so-called gaffer, and that was Mulchand Dedia, who is like an empire of gaffer. He's like the king of the gaffing empire in
You
Bombay.
really have discovered.
Oh, I do. I mean, if Mulchand is as right up there as with Irfan Khan and Robert Pattinson, I mean, he has lit this whole this whole city, and many, many films. But he was a matching blouse sari seller. And so, Mulchand, so we were the three. And I used to fear, how would the girls, want to be, what would happen with the camera? But the interesting thing is, because it was mostly Mitch and Alex, the two white boys, who were with me, they used to, Rekha would call them, "Ye to chakke hain," they would say. ये तो छक्का है, इसको तो समझ नहीं आता. They are basically eunuchs, and why would they wouldn't understand. So they felt unjudged by the white folks, which was really a liberation and wonderful for me, because that was the problem, because it's a very interesting and complicated universe where they might take off clothes on the stripping in the dance floor, but as soon as they are off it, they are covered completely. In the green room, they put on their clothes under clothes. There's a deep sense of modesty and propriety that happens right off the floor, Anyway, so that's how we did it. But in this form of filmmaking, you really don't know what is going to happen next. So in the middle of the film, Rosie says that she's going to go home to Hyderabad and give dowry, the money she's saved for her sister's wedding. And so we say, let's go with her to Hyderabad. And we go to Hyderabad, and I had no idea this would happen. And she gets to the village, and we go with her, and the mother comes out, an emaciated, really poor lady, and she says, she takes the money from Rosie, and she says, "Please don't come into the house, you will pollute it." And this woman is left on the veranda of her house, just in tears, and gives her the money that she can at least support her family, but she's not allowed. Yeah. And that's the truth and power of reality.
What's amazing about India Cabaret is they're also having a lot of fun. Yeah. And so you see the destitution, but it's also just so full of joy and pleasure.
And there was a moment in India Cabaret which created then what became Salaam Bombay, because at night we would go home to their house at 3 a.m. and then they would wake up, groggy at 12 o'clock. And at 12 o'clock, the chai paus, the tea boys, would come into their room with hot tea in their crates, and Rekha and Rosie would say, "Nacho." Like a role reversal, like what the men had said to them the night before. "Are nacho." And these, pathetic, tuneless chai paus would know only one song. "I am a disco dancer. I am a disco." And then they would give these chai to them, singing this one song. "Kuch aur nahi aata." They would, charmingly yell at these kids. It's like the men would have yelled at them the night before. And anyway, so that is a scene in India Cabaret, which then became the seed amongst many other seeds that then went to Salaam Bombay. Because I began to tire, to be honest. I began to tire about, I wanted audiences for my films, for my documentaries. And this was 1985. So it's like, I sold them to television, not here, they didn't want them, but wherever. But it was like selling them to a void. And sometimes you'd have a festival or two, but otherwise you didn't have audiences. And, our families, no one saw them because there was nowhere to see them.
I do want to get into some more of these lessons that you took from the cinema verite days into your later filmmaking of fiction, of studio films. What were some of the key insights of verite filmmaking that have informed your approach ever since?
Well, this idea of approximating the unpredictability of life, of the electricity of life, the fact that you just don't know what's going to happen, and when that's what I always want to capture in fiction filmmaking. I didn't go to school in fiction filmmaking. I studied only cinema verite. And what do you study about it? You just study the environment of how you do make something. But then you have to just do it. That was my study, right? But it was in the narrative, it was in the editing room, how you create a story, in the shooting of it and in the cutting of it, that creates a narrative rhythm. And I began to really want to control the light, to control the gesture, to control the cutting, of course, and all of that. And that was what led me to make Salaam Bombay as a fiction film.
So you touched upon, the question that I was going to ask about Salaam Bombay. You are a wonderful portraitist of the city. Even your films that are not directly about urban life have beautiful scenes of urbanity. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you approach filming the city? What kind of influences maybe have shaped the way in which you kind of have these amazing compositions where things are happening on different planes at the same time? There's something in the foreground, there's movement in the background, this kind of very incredible synergy of color and movement and sound that really captures the pulse of a city.
Thank you. I mean, firstly, it's the way of seeing, which was definitely taught to me by the idea of cinema verite, the idea of what makes Bombay, let's say, distinctive from Delhi, which is a very different thing. I come from Delhi, but Bombay became the sort of bed of my earliest film work, mostly because I started living in Antoff Hill, I started living in Bandra Chawls, I started living in these places without talking to my upper class friends at all. I was just fully immersed in that. But because of the training of cinema verite, of how to enter into the membrane of people's lives firstly, and then you learn the city that way. That was one thing. But the other thing is my major passion, which continues to be, is artistic still photography. I was married first to Mitch Epstein, who was one of the great photographers in the world today, really. But we were both struggling artists at the time. But I was taught how to see really by Mitch, and then Arche and Cartier-Bresson, and then Raghubir Singh and Raghu Rai to some extent, and then later Dayanita, and so many. These are the fuel. This is the fuel of my way of seeing.
What is remarkable about Salaam Bombay is that it never feels exoticizing, exploitative, but it still manages to find that beauty, that vibrancy. And I'm just curious, the
humor is vital to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most humanizing elements of the film, is that everyone is witty and funny and has humor in their lives. When you were making the film, did you have a sense of who it was for? Like what audience? Because it became such a huge international hit. People watch it all over the world. What did you think that would happen? Did you have a sense of where this would play and who would be watching it and whether they would understand it or how Western eyes would see it, all of that?
We were all poor and we somehow continued to be a little poor. But I began to cut my films, Salaam Bombay and India Cabaret before that, in these arty discount editing rooms in New York, Rivington Street, New York Arts Cooperatives, stuff like that. And I used to share the editing room because it was 24 hours you'd pay for, and it was very cheap, but with my dear friend Spike Lee. And Spike would do 12 hours in the morning, and we would fight over night shifts and morning shifts, and I would do 12 hours and the other 12 hours so that we would save even more money. And he was cutting She's Gotta Have It. And I think I was cutting, which is the first black indie that was made actually at that time. And I was, I think, cutting India Cabaret then, or going into Salaam Bombay. I'm not sure exactly, but with the next film. And when She's Gotta Have It came out, and it was such a lovely, fantastic hit because it was it was a first time. I mean, we didn't have films like that, and it was such a hit. And of course, he comes from that society. We were in New York City. People were embracing that culture, fatafat se, And I was making Salam Bombay. I never expected. And that's the beauty of it, I must say. Once, if you do work, but keep the standard. I mean, I was going to be as good as anything, in the sense that I was not going to make, apologist cinema. Like, I remember Sandy, our cinematographer, we came with reams of silks, which we would spread out on Kamatipura and spread out on Grant Road, and all the people of the city would look around. Ye kya ho raha hai? And these reams of silken cloths would be over these train stations, and they would think कि भाई हेमा मिलनी आएगी या कोई स्टार आएगा, and these two chai paos would come in, and they say ये क्या हो रहा है, and it would. But we made these things to be as good as we possibly could, in terms of the look of it. We really spent all our money. In fact, I'd raised Salam Bombay money through scamming. I used to say I had this, but I actually didn't have it, and then I would, the Ponzi started with me, I think. And I had a matching fund from Channel 4 television. They gave me whatever I would match, and I wanted $450,000 from them, but I didn't get 450 from anyone else, and I got 150 from NFDC, National Film Development Corporation, but I told Channel 4 that I had 300 instead of 150. So they gave me 300. So I had only 450. And we decided to really spend all the money on shooting, on making it for 35, on making it with the best lenses, on making it with the diffusion, with whatever we needed, So, but we didn't have the money for post. And I would raise money at night because European time zones helped me in that sense. I would shoot and I would raise money at night. Ki aayega kuch paisa ke nahi. Finally, the French came in the 6th week of shooting with the balance money. That's how we made it. But we never compromised on quality. So that is why, because I didn't want to look like those films that you can hardly figure out. I really didn't. And also, it's also why I ask extraordinary artistic photographers. In that case, like Sunita Arborwala herself is an amazing photographer, and Mitch, to make stills of what we are doing. So now Salam Bombay, I mean, we had an exhibition in Cannes while you went in to see Salam, because the images are so extraordinary, and they continue to be. So that is something I would really urge filmmakers to do, is to not drop the quality, to keep on going in every aspect of it, because publicity is a huge part of filmmaking. So, and anyway, so the photography of it was vital to me. And we kept going that way until we got the money later. But, then you have the quality. If you can't fix a film after it's done,
Yeah. So,
yeah. A check for every thali would be nice.
we should have factored in the applause into our run of show. So, I was saying earlier what was so unique about So Far From India for me is that I don't know many films from that time that were going back and forth, that were doing that immigrant experience from both lenses, who was left behind, who went. And then, later in your career, you made some pioneering cross-border films, The Namesake, there's, of course, Queen of Katwe in its own way, I think, is a cross-border film, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, these films that really, you really brought together different cultures, you mix language in the films, you mix music, and you managed to get them shown everywhere, like in India, in South Asia, in the West. Tell me a little bit about making the experience of making those films, getting them produced, getting them funded, showing them, because I feel like no one else was doing that when you were doing it. What was that like?
Well, because I was a child of crossing borders, I say and I think and I believe that it's because my roots are strong at home here that I can fly anywhere, But I never left at 18 to be an immigrant, or I still have a hugely accordion-like Indian passport, ke visa, dete jao, dete jao, dete jao. But I will refuse to be anything else, So but I really understood, and I deeply understand what it is like to look outside your window in New York City and instead of the Hudson River, see my garden in Kampala. I think cinema actually lends itself much more powerfully to exile, to the notion of living between worlds, even more than literature, because you can evoke it, like that. You can evoke the emotion in one's heart and through one's eyes. I think you have to keep your distinctiveness as your calling card. I didn't go out. I was recently in Los Angeles. They were showing Mississippi Masala, 30th anniversary and whatever, and all of them. And I said, I didn't want to be a cupcake, as I said, it just came out of my mouth, because I didn't want to be like everyone else. I didn't come to make rom-coms with white people. I just didn't. So I was not interested in being in the A-list of Hollywood. What happened was Salaam Bombay became a smash hit, went up to all the Oscars, sab kuch, and then they began to look at me as something that they could come to me for my way of seeing, my sensibility. But I didn't want their sensibility. At that time, it was every child of every hue. I got many films of different children's tales, Africa Ko De Do, Sarafina, there was one, there were so many films. But I had the good sense to not do it because I was interested in being a brown person between black and white, which was how I was when I was at university there. And it was a very interesting, now you all are there's so many, then in the, what is that, 76, 77, every time I would see an Indian, like in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I would like run across the street, Haji, aap Indian, kahan se aaye? Because you used to be lonely.
Now we even have New York's representatives who are Indian, like your son.
Yes,
a hero for many of us.
Yes, thank you. Although he calls himself Ugandan, which is Ugandan
right,
and Indian,
course.
but it's cool. But anyway, then we were very rare. And but anyway, I was interested in speaking of the stories that I felt that only I could tell. And that you would not be able to tell unless you gave me the money to tell it, that was my calling card. So that became Mississippi Masala, this, what I call the hierarchy of color, of being between these two worlds. And anyway, that led to my reading. I hadn't even gone to the African continent. People think I'm from East Africa because now I've lived there for so many years, but I had never been to that continent. I had simply read about the Asian expulsion of Indians who had lived there for 3 generations and were suddenly asked to leave, etc. So I have this, one thing the Ivy League gives you, and you've been there, so is I call it the foolish confidence. The foolish confidence of the Ivy League is such that, they'll say, you called Denzel Washington, what is the worst he can say? No, right? Because before we would not think that we could call people like that. But I really, had that confidence, weird confidence. And that's when I started to think about Mississippi Masala, the story of it. And by that time, studio heads and all would want to see me because of Salaam Bombay and so. And I would go in and that was what, 1989. 1990 when I pitched it. And yes, Spike had happened, but Spike had happened with one film. There was still no form of black filmmaking, So I would go to these all-white studios and they would say, Mira, what do you want to do and all, and I would pitch Mississippi Masala with Denzel already attached to it, which was quite a big deal. He wasn't a big star then. It was his 3rd film, I think. He won the Oscar for Glory while we were shooting Mississippi Masala.
Not when you
so that's a difference, In any case, they would listen to me and they would literally say, the head of Orion Pictures said to me, can't you make room for a white protagonist? And that was his exact line. And the foolish confidence kicked in here. And I laughed and I said, I can assure you, dear Bill, that every waiter in this film will be white. And he looked at me and he said, ha, 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 he laughed. And I, ha, 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 and I was shown the door and I never got $1. But it was my belief. And it is true, but I didn't even keep that promise. There are no white waiters in the film either. There's only one white racist.
Can you talk about sensuality as a theme of your filmography? I mean, you made Kama Sutra, the film, so it's clearly an interest of yours, but yeah, just what's your approach to that?
Well, it's a bit like the visual love I have of photography. I'm a sensualist, a deep and deep and almost I would say a hedonist. You know, I'm really somebody who goes for it, and I'm interested in ecstasy, and I'm interested in the great beauty of these performers and actors and the world. You know, and I'm also really, that's why I made India Cabaret. I can't stand mostly how people portray us. You know, especially as women, I can't stand the sexism in it, and I can't stand the grotesque in it, and I can't stand the just the debasement of what I consider almost, you know, a spiritual plane, you know, and which is really also why I made the Kama Sutra, whether it's successful or not. But that was the quest. You know, we came from a culture that really held sensuality as an art, you know, and what happened, you know, and well, the British happened, but many other things happened too. But I did make Mississippi Masala in a stupor of love. I had fallen in love slam bang, and it was like the first time, and my love was in Uganda, and I was in Mississippi, and it was just the phones that we would have, and there were no DHLs, and there were no cell phones. It was just, you know, phones, and so I really understood what it was like to long for someone. You know, when it comes to the scenes with the love, you know, and he looked at me like, oh my God, these female directors, man, I mean, don't give me, he looked at me like that. And I said, just in case you think I'm a female director who wants sentiment, let me tell you what it's like to be in love. It's about these things. And then and I said, you know what, Excel, this I didn't know, but I was bullshitting. I said, the audience will scream for it. I'm telling you, if you give me vulnerability like this, they'll scream for it. So that instinct for me is very powerful. I absolutely do not give up. Yeah.
Can you talk about that? How you work with music and the beautiful sense of rhythm that you have that we saw in these scenes?
Well, I believe in life. I'm a lifeist. You know, I really believe that also films have to give me the juice to keep on going, because it's a very tough world, and it's a very terrible world these days, and I need that, you know, fuel. And oftentimes with music, there's a piece of music that will lead me to make that, you know, it is the sound of the film. Many times I've worked, just like with actors who have never acted before, I've worked with musicians who have never composed for movies before. I was playing Rag Kirvani by the great L. Subramaniam, and it's and I love, of course, our classical music, but there are certain pieces and everything, the way he worked in his music, and he had never made a movie. I called him and went to live again with him and he was married to Vijay Shankar then, the great Lakshmi Shankar's daughter, and we just like piled up on his floor and look, took pieces of music that he had already recorded, about 4 of them that we used as is in Salaam Bombay, but then he had to also learn how to compose music to the image. And that was a learning, but you know, when there are such legends as Mani Subramaniam, then they are the deepest, most humble and most deepest musicians. And you know, just like I find actors and all that, I also find musicians. And actually, the great Ali Sethi his first recording was in Reluctant Fundamentalist. He sang a couple of songs that I recorded right on a theater like this while we were shooting, and he began his recording stuff with me, and is also my teacher of music. He's my little junior Guruji. He teaches me. We have Zoom Reyaz. We through COVID, I was learning music with him, and so it's really a beautiful thing, you know, when you can see this extraordinary talent and then you go off with it. So I'm really looking forward to now Amrita Shergill. I'm hearing the voice of Aruj Aftab. I'm hearing Punjabi music. You know, it's going to be extraordinary because Amrita came from a real European tradition, but also then became into the Punjabi tradition, and that amalgam, you know, to go from Debussy and Brahms to, you know, real Punjabi, you know, prayers and tappas and ghazal also of a sort, but mostly Punjabi folk music is a beautiful amalgam. And that's what, you know, the world can give me and these stories give me, the ability to not make it just one thing, because life is not just the one thing. Yeah.
Let's open it up to the audience now.
I wanted to ask you a question on, your early years when the themes that you chose were, ahead of its time, but you as a person, they were ahead for you as years as well. Like you were quite young when you chose those subjects. And how did you navigate your emotions, like being an empath and having the curse of empath and navigating empathy?
Oh,
How did you navigate your empathy along with being a filmmaker so that while you're in the underbelly of everything that's happening, like you're strong and very hard hitting themes, how did you navigate those undercurrent in your emotions to become the force that you are right now?
Thank you. Well, when I'm in the belly of it, it's not pleasant, and I still tell you that it's not like you think that, I don't think that I struggle deeply, and it's not easy in India cabaret life and world. It's not easy to be amidst the ugliness of the even the lesser than the working class, ugliness of the environments and of the pigs careening and of the people looking at you like you're just ready to be raped in a second because you're one of those, and the way it's not easy. But what I did was I never mixed it up. I never went from Malabar Hill to Antoff Hill. I stayed right there. And that was very hard to do, but you can do that when you're anonymous, I didn't tell the world that I knew that I was doing that. I just used to do that. And I remember I rented a chawl, a one room in Bandra, which I took a thing of paint and I just painted it white so it looked sort of clear. And I had old friends, Manmohan Shetty and Om Puri were our old friends of mine, and they would come once in like a month and just say, Meera ji, kya ho raha hai, and what do you, like I would have some some touch with the outside world, and sometimes it would really get hard on me, not to see any beauty. And I have one trick that I do. I love textile, and there's a shop, it's still there, called Kasab. Hansa Ben runs this shop in Kasab. It's in Nepean Sea Road, and it's got Indian kalamkari and just beautiful things that I like, just cloth. And I would just sit there without talking to anyone, just looking at the beauty of cloth, without me declaring myself, or anyone even knew me, nothing. But just I needed to sustain myself a little bit in the unquestioning realm of beauty because it was very, very tough to be in the pit, all the time. Struggle and keeping is constant. Believe me, I feel it. I feel it so much, even now. I sometimes think I'm not reaching anyone. I sometimes think, why did I take 8 years to make this musical my way? I'm missing cinema, and now will I not the doubt. I don't have self-doubt in that way, but the questioning of whether I'm still speaking to people is there with me. And that's why the other day, in the opening party, I went somewhere and a lot of younger filmmakers whose work I had seen but did not know, came to talk to me, and they tell me details of how they became filmmakers because of some things they had seen I had done or whatever. And these things are nourishing. These things you think, really? So it's not like I'm shy, as you can tell, but one needs that. I sometimes do look for that sustenance, because I chose a way that is true to myself, and not a way to join the establishment that I'm very now well known in, which is to say the Hollywood scene or that scene. But so there's sometimes you feel like, are you just marginal in everything, But somehow the marginality is actually what is my art, Yeah.
My name is Abhay Verma and I'm an actor. I would really just would like to shed some light on the ways and the ideas basically for all the actors like me to just try to cross borders like you did, since you're the flag bearer and brand ambassador of Crossing Borders. So I think you'd be the best person to answer that. And yeah, this question
Basically,
just.
the question is, how do you cross borders?
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
With work, primarily. With work, how can you cross borders? And I mean, this comes from a very.
Well, I think, thank you, Abhay. I would say, firstly, as an actor, um, arm yourself, train yourself with an appetite of not just how to use your voice, but expose yourself to art, to education, to reading, to all kinds of performance that is now no longer just restricted to cinema. It could be performance art, it could be, things that how people express themselves. And now with the internet, of course, you have access to a lot of what I call nourishment. For me, what I do, I'm a gardener. I look at gardens. I look at landscape. I look at. I really need to look at painting to keep working, and it's. Feel like you have to widen your horizons and really educate yourself in various ways that are not necessarily directly about acting. But I also would say to arm yourself with training in acting, in the sense of the voice. I feel a lot of actors I meet here who are so talented but have no training in how to speak, in dialogue. And I don't mean how to find an accent or anything like that. I mean just how to use your voice, how to change your voice, how to put life in your voice. Those things need training. But you also should know that there's a lot of work that's coming to India from various places. So that you should be open to that process of doing the audition dance. And I would say that take the auditions like as little schools of acting, get energized by being rejected. Because that's how I learned, every time somebody would say no, I would say, I'm going to show you. And then don't get cowed by it, go for it, That's the only thing I can give you, except if you have the luck of being seen by me in a cafe and I'll say, hey.
I'd really like to know the cafe's name though, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank
Come to the gardens.
you. Great.
My question here is that, there's a lot of respect that you understand music. But it is not just about understanding music, it's about understanding the cultural nuances that enrich, when you do a deep dive into that culture. So I'm not talking about today what you are, I'm talking about when you started off or when you did India Cabaret or when you did Monsoon Wedding. Now Gujarati is not your language, right? Or same way, even in dialogues, knowing a language and is not just about dialogues. You have to understand the nuances of the language. Similarly, Monsoon Wedding, the songs part or the dialogues part, bringing out that chirpiness or that spirit in that language, आपने कैसे वो manage किया उस समय?
It's funny because a lot of people, because of my last name, think I'm from Kerala, right? And in the middle of Monsoon Wedding, I remember Nasir Bhai asked me, he said, Meera, तुझे ये पंजाबियत कैसे मालूम है यार, coming from Kerala, And I looked at him and I said, I'm, 100% hardcore Punjabi. Yeah, so I'm technically a Nair, and I'm very happy always to be confused from South India. But I'm just saying that people think I'm something. But in terms of what you call the chirpiness or the Punjabiyat, the life, the life force, it's something that, I was certainly kind of raised with, or I recognize. But it is also to come from, to be a student, really, of it, not in an academic way, but in a permeable way, something that I feel like. You're talking about the Gujarati thing, in so far from India, in this form of cinema verite, you surrender to the place that you're in, you surrender to the people that you want to show themselves to your camera. You can't just summon it up. Why should they, right? But I'm talking about the music, that, unke pole mein, for instance, when the minstrels would walk through and to sing the bhajans and sing, that's what would really be happening, And that's also the incredible richness of our own culture, where we have live music as very much part of our lives, right? So it's about, in a deepest sense, it's about listening, And I think that is, if there's any talent I have, I'm a very avid listener. I'm a deep listener. I do not, if anyone interrupts, I hate it. I love to listen. When it comes to music or to people, you know. So it comes from the love, I think, of and then as you grow, I think I expose myself to more, but I also look for it. I look for it. I think Pakistani music is extraordinary. I think the Punjabi, the sound one hears now in the Punjab part of Pakistan is something that I have not heard in India, in our side. And so that kind of jugalbandi is something that I love. It like sustains me, you know. So it comes from, I think, a love, and then you try to find the knowledge to go with it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it shows.
Thank you so much. It's a joy.
Thank you so much.
Hello, ma'am. Here, my question was, compared to back in the day and today, how vast and how different has the casting process changed? And lastly, I want to ask the saturation of Indian cinema.
Well, my eyes are always open, and I never forget an actor. I never forget a performance I love. So I keep it all in my mind, you know, when I just like Rasika Duggal is someone I had seen, and I loved her work, and I looked. Is she? Hi,
She's here in the
sweetheart.
audience.
I didn't even know you were here. But anyway, and I wanted to work with her. And I had not a huge part or something, but in Suitable Boy, it was like this banquet, you know, that I could cast people. And she was sweet enough to say yes to that part, which is normally she'd be a central figure. And here she was, you know, central to me, but there was a lot of people, you know. So I will look for something that I can work with some actor that I love, you know, that I wanted to work with, you know. So sometimes it's like that, and most times I must say it's auditions. You know, it's like I meet people. You know, I don't remember how I met Ishan Khattar, for instance, but I met him in an audition, and I was just magnetized. I just needed to. He was just extraordinary, and then I asked Tabu to come because they were lovers in Suitable Boy. They had to be. Then I would, you know, sort of see and check out what the chemistry was like, and like that, you know. So normally it's through casting directors, you see auditions. It was only the first time I did it through Zoom, like hundreds of actors was in National Treasure. But normally I don't do that, you know, normally it's in person. And with casting directors, I really trust, you know. I worked with Nandini Shrikant for a long, long time, and Karan Malli, but I also worked with Dilip Shankar since 30 years, you know. So they also know my eye, and they know that I can handle, like, I think Tanya Maniktala, who was Lata in Suitable Boy, we must have seen 500 young women, you know, over maybe 8 months to cast Lata, because Lata was someone who had to be from the 50s, who had to have the propriety and the kind of the way young women were raised, you know, who at that time, you know, women who had not been there, done that, women who were very different from the jaded sort of worldly quality of a lot of young women now, you know. And I needed that, and it took me a long time to find her. And I think she was an executive in an advertising company, and you know, the Dilip said, oh, you know, she has dark circles today. She's just coming all the way from Gurgaon after a long day at work. And I said, doesn't matter. It's more about the quality. And the minute I saw her and those eyes and that feeling of like a innocence but intelligence, it was beautiful. So it's like that, you know. I just keep going until I find the person. Unless unlike Rasika, unless I already know I want to work with that person, so I look for a role for that person. Unless it's that, then otherwise I'm always looking. Yeah.
All right, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Meera.
Shukriya.
And thank you for this wonderful audience.